U.S. military strikes inside of Venezuela may be coming here in the next few weeks. At least that's what we're hearing from a few different reports, and it sort of fits. I mean, we clearly have the necessary assets on station, from F-35 stealth fighters to Reaper drones, Marine Amphibious Ready Group, guided missile destroyers, and more. There's been no real pushback on the recent strikes against the alleged drug boats, and going after cartel facilities or cartel leadership in Venezuela is sort of the next step if we were to escalate this even further. So today we're going to get into updates on U.S. operations in the Caribbean, pushback from Venezuela, and continued discussion about the legality of these actions. And quick teaser, the guy who argued that enhanced interrogation techniques were legal after 9/11 is saying these strikes against the cartels are not. Now, starting out, last night, NBC News reported that the U.S. is prepping for strikes inside of Venezuela. Quote, U.S. military officials are drawing up options to target drug traffickers inside of Venezuela, and strikes within the country's borders could potentially begin in a matter of weeks, 4 sources told NBC News. They say strikes inside of Venezuela could happen soon, but the president has not yet approved anything. 2 of the sources said that the recent escalation is in part due to Venezuelan President Maduro not doing enough to stop the flow of illicit drugs in his country. The plans being discussed primarily focus on drone strikes against drug trafficking groups' members and leadership, as well as targeting drug labs. Asked for comment, the White House referred to a previous statement from the president, quote, "We'll see what happens. Venezuela is sending us their gang members, their drug dealers, and drugs. It is not acceptable," and the Pentagon declined to comment. Again, this is not a crazy next step, and we've talked about this in past videos when things started to heat up in the Caribbean and with Venezuela. We saw the strikes against the alleged cartel boats, people moving physical product to the United States. The next step from there is not going after Maduro. It's not going after the Venezuelan government. It's going after, one step up the ladder. Go after the facility where these traffickers are housing the product in Venezuela. Maybe the vehicles moving the product from the facility to the boats. Anything like that. And you have to believe that we have that intelligence. The U.S. military and intelligence community has that on hand. If we're able to identify that a certain boat is being used by a certain cartel to move product, it's not that hard to say, okay, where did the boat get loaded? We're clearly watching these things play out. And personally, I think what we're seeing in Venezuela is more of an attempt to oust Nicolas Maduro than it is about drugs. But if we're continuing the conversation that this is all about stopping the drug flow into the United States, then clearly going after cartel members kind of fits. And a big thing that we're seeing here is who is going to take the side of the cartels and push back and say, don't kill those guys, because cartel members are bad. Drugs flowing into the United States are bad. It should not be all that surprising that the next step here are lethal strikes inside of Venezuela. Now, in line with this, we did get a report from Task and Purpose that I thought was really interesting this week, talking about how a special ops mothership has been spotted in the Caribbean. And a quick note, I'm going to link the sources to this one in the description for sure. If this wasn't in Task and Purpose, if this was some other publication that I did not respect, like I do Task and Purpose, I would really have some questions about this. But I'm taking this as something that I just did not know about before this article. They say the MV Ocean Trader, a floating barracks, helicopter base, and command center for Special Operations Forces, is currently operating in the Caribbean. A military Sealift Command spokesperson confirmed to Task and Purpose that the MV Ocean Trader is currently operating there. The official deferred questions about its mission to U.S. Special Operations Command, which declined to comment. They said, quote, quoting retired Navy Captain Bradley Martin, a senior policy researcher at RAND Corporation, quote, "The ship is intended to blend in with merchant traffic, whereas obviously a destroyer shows someplace or an amphibious ship, something like that might not attract as much attention." They say the ship is built to carry up to 159 Special Ops forces, plus a crew of 50, for 45 days at sea before having to refuel and be resupplied at port. They quote another, Navy Captain Brett Sadler of the Heritage Foundation, quote, "If the ship is in the Caribbean and hosting special forces, it is clearly supporting the operation to interdict cartel drug boats. The limited endurance of the ship, however, would mean that there are likely other vessels rotating in to replace it in time." So again, I'm not very familiar with that tactic. They say that ships like this have been utilized in the past where it looks like a civilian vessel. It's clearly a military vessel, and I can see how that starts to blur the lines with maybe trying to conceal a military presence on commercial vessels. So new one for me here. But if this MV Ocean Trader, as has been mentioned by a couple reliable outlets at this point, is in the Caribbean. Of course, that's further suggesting that we have an increase in strikes or kinetic activity coming, maybe even directed raids by special operations forces into Venezuela. Now, when we're looking at what the U.S. strategy is here, Secretary of State Marco Rubio has been very on message from the very beginning, a consistent talking point about why we're doing what we're doing and why it's important. He answered this question just a couple days ago when it came to blowing up the third or maybe fourth cartel boat in the Caribbean. Here's how Secretary Rubio lays out ongoing operations in Southern Command. Let's give it a listen.
Because interdiction doesn't work. You want to stop these drug cartels, you have to make clear to them they're not going to get their boats here. Interdiction, they don't care about losing a boat. They don't care about losing some drugs. They've already factored that into their business model. What will stop them completely is that they know if they go out there, they're not going to make the journey. Look, this is an imminent, immediate threat to the United States. If you tell me there's a boat full of drugs headed towards the United States, to drop off drugs here and poison our people, that's as big a threat as if some, country was coming in to attack an American city. It needs to be stopped. The way it's been handled in the past hasn't worked. And boy, let me tell you something. You're not seeing nearly as many boats right now as you were a couple weeks ago. So it has worked and it will continue to work. And the president's very simple. He's not going to continue to allow these drug cartels to flood America with poisonous drugs that are killing our people indefinitely.
Now, there are plenty of people lining up in favor of this, saying this is a good thing, this is the appropriate policy to follow, which personally shows to me why this is going to continue and why it is more likely that we're going to see an escalation, strikes inside of Venezuela, maybe those targeted raids against cartel personnel. We have exiled presidential candidate Edmundo Urrutia, apologies in the pronunciation, who said, quote, "The military deployment was a necessary measure to dismantle the criminal structure that Maduro leads." Opposition figurehead Machado agreed, saying that Venezuelan crime gangs were a, quote, "real and growing threat to the security and stability of the Americas." And of course, here in the United States, we are seeing a lot of support for the taking out of cartel members and drug traffickers. These groups, as we've mentioned in recent videos, are being referred to more and more as narco-trafficking terrorists. That's a bad guy, right? It clearly paints the picture of they should be on a target list somewhere, and the people pushing back, that we're going to get to here in a second, are not getting a lot of traction because they're forced to take the side seemingly, not of law and order, not of justification, legal justification domestically and internationally, but seemingly take the side of narco-trafficking terrorists. Nobody really wants to do that. Now, in terms of some pushback, we, of course, are seeing some from the Venezuelan military, Maduro as well. I should note that just yesterday, Venezuela released this video showing a coastal defense exercise in Cape San Ramon. They do have military capabilities that could result in the loss of U.S. military lives. Like, this is not a one-to-one. The U.S. military in full force would sweep right over the Venezuelan military, but, they do have the ability to down aircraft. They could put up enough of a fight to cause the loss of U.S. military equipment or personnel. We need to be very clear about that. And that's only initial operations, not even getting into what the next phases of some long-term fight in Venezuela might look like. So we are seeing some flexing from the Venezuelan military. On Sunday, this past Sunday, Venezuelan President Maduro sent a letter to President Trump where he rejected as absolutely false U.S. allegations that he leads a drug cartel and urged Trump to keep the peace. We have another opposition figure, so somebody that is not like Maduro, came out last week against a U.S. invasion, saying, quote, "I continue to believe that the solution is not military but political." He said Trump's actions were counterproductive and serves to entrench those that are already in power. That's actually something that a Venezuelan political analyst here, Anabel Sanchez Ismail, hit on as well in a comment to NBC News, saying, quote, "An attack on Venezuelan soil would have consequences from diplomatic protests to an increase in political persecutions of those they classify as collaborators, to further uniting the population with the need to defend sovereignty reaffirmed." And this is one of the challenges when looking at this. And again, personally, it looks to me like the goal is not necessarily drugs. I should drill in on that real quick rather than just saying it. Tren de Aragua is a very real organization. They exist. They do traffic drugs to the United States. When you look at cartel capabilities or size, they are way down the list. They're not even top in that necessary. They might be one of the top in Venezuela. They're not the top in Colombia next door. Nothing compared to a lot of the cartels we see in Mexico. Then when you look at the flow of drugs coming into the United States, Yes, some are coming through Colombia from Venezuela to the United States. In terms of volume, it's nothing compared to the Pacific side of Mexico or through Mexico itself. So if we really wanted to go after drugs, like that was our number one priority, we wouldn't be going after Venezuela, I guess is the best way to put it. If we wanted to go after cartels, because cartels is bad and they're facilitating this drug trade, Tren de Aragua is not the biggest threat. And we've gone over this in multiple videos with Stefano Rittendale from All Source News back in the channel. You can find those regularly talking about not just Venezuela, but also the capabilities of cartels in Mexico. So if we're not going after the top cartel and we're not going after the top trafficking location for drugs, there must be something else at play here. And to me, it looks like the focus is the overthrow of the Maduro regime. With that, as coming from a couple Venezuelan analysts here, is that might not necessarily result in a positive outcome. One of the arguments is that we would see an increased flow of migration coming from Venezuela, trying to find protection and asylum anywhere else. If, assuming that the country of Venezuela starts to fail, should a war kick off like that? Maybe. I guess there's probably some people also making the argument that if Maduro falls and somebody good comes in, then you'll have people from around the region, including the United States, trying to get back into Venezuela. That did happen with Syria. I don't know that I would bank on that, getting ready to topple a regime, but it could be a thought. Now, we are starting to hear more and more from regional leaders, and there was an interview just a couple of days ago at the United Nations, Mehdi Hassan talking with the Cuban deputy foreign minister, where he shared his thoughts on what this could mean for the region. Gives you an idea of how some countries there, Cuba's not a close U.S. ally, not by a long shot, but I think the way he presents this is important to hear. Let's give that a quick listen.
How worried are you about the prospect of a war?
Very worried. Very worried. There's a threatening stance against Venezuela. Very irresponsible, believing that you can do that without causing a great amount of loss of life. It's a threat to Venezuela, it's a threat to the whole continent, the whole region, which it means that the United States is going to apply what they call peace through force, which is a threatening imposition of the will of the mightiest.
And the way he put that together makes me wonder how many different countries in Latin America and South America have that same general view of, even if they're friendly with the United States, it's a different story when you see a foreign power coming into your area and start to kill people and start to affect military influence and maybe even take over territory or land troops on shore. Those solid relationships would come under strain, no doubt, I think is the simplest way to put it. Now, in turning to the legal arguments here, which I personally think are very important, and I think we should spend more time on this in the last 20 years than we have. We've swept it under the rug, and we're dealing with it year in and year out. The fact that, quite frankly, our political leadership across the spectrum, because this is a conversation that should have been had over and over again, and we don't have it. And the next thing you know, we end up in a, drone strikes in areas where we don't know if it's really legal or not, and the conversation isn't even had. And I think that's bad for the United States. But it's popping up again here. We've got John Yoo speaking out, saying that Trump's boat strikes against the cartels risk crossing the line between law enforcement and war. Yoo is a law professor at the University of California at Berkeley and a non-resident senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Here's the thing. The way we operate in the U.S. political arena is when a Republican does something, you can guarantee that Democrats are going to line up saying why it's bad, wrong, illegal, and so on. Vice versa. When a Democrat does something, you can count on any number of Republicans explaining why it is the worst thing in the world, wrong, illegal, et cetera, et cetera. That's just standard. So it doesn't carry as much weight when you have a Democrat ridiculing a Republican and vice versa. John Yoo, albeit a lawyer, he has kind of a background in this. He worked for the first Bush administration just after 9/11, where he is the one who argued that enhanced interrogations like waterboarding were perfectly legal. This is stuff that ended up being called torture. And he's the one saying, no, it's actually okay. This is stuff that needs to happen. So give you an idea where this guy's coming from. And he is saying what is happening right now in the Caribbean, it's a step too far. We should not be doing this. He said the Trump administration is right that illicit drugs are inflicting more harm on the United States than most armed conflicts have. But the United States cannot wage war against any source of harm to Americans. As an official in the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel, I was at my desk on September 11, 2001. I advised that the United States could wage war against al-Qaeda without blurring the distinction between crime and war. After 9/11, the U.S. declared that it would wage war for the first time against an organization rather than a nation. But the drug cartels alone do not present a similar challenge that rises to the level of war. if the administration does meet the high standards for war, it would open the door to another set of difficult problems. Every member, not just of the Venezuelan armed forces, but also of the drug cartels, would become a legitimate military target. The U.S. could attack and even occupy Venezuelan territory, and all Venezuelans here would become enemy aliens. I think you raises some really good points, and I have a hard time understanding the urgency here. I can forgive the folks after 9/11 with the idea of another attack could be coming. If you remember that time, for those of you who can remember that time, we thought that we were just going to get something like 9/11 every couple months, maybe every couple years. Like, this is just the new normal. And we had to get on the offensive. We had to get out there and find and take down these al-Qaeda cells, or there'd be another plane crashing into another tower. So the urgency was essential when the 2001 authorization for the use of military force came about. I would argue that it has been used inappropriately in many cases since then, but there was a sense of urgency at the time. I don't understand and have not yet seen how that sense of urgency applies today. Because yes, drugs are bad. Yes, cartels are bad. Yes, I would love to stop the flow of drugs into the United States. I don't think, and this is one of the things that you argues, is what made this urgent last week where it didn't meet this same level of urgency anytime up until then, because nothing materially changed. We just made the decision, now is the time. We'll see where this goes. I think this is worthy of a conversation in the United States. I wish more outlets were covering this. I wish more of our politicians were standing up across the aisle to say, these might be good targets. We might want to get rid of these guys. It might be for a noble cause, but we need to make sure we go about doing this the right way for any number of reasons. We don't want to set a bad precedent on the international stage. We don't want to go down a route that could be leveraged in a different capacity by a future administration to an even steeper degree. We don't want to put our service members at risk of conducting any sort of illegal action that they could be found guilty of sometime down the road. So for all of the reasons, I want to make sure we continue to have this conversation, and I hope to see it get more and more traction as we continue to see further escalation between the United States and Venezuela. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.